My guest today is Lia Garvin, who is an operations leader and an executive coach who's on a mission to transform the workplace one conversation at a time. Lia has extensive experience working in some of the most influential companies in tech, including Microsoft, Apple, and Google, to explore the power of reframing one's thoughts to overcome common challenges found in the modern workplace. In today's episode, we talk about her book, Unstuck, Reframe Your Thinking to Free Yourself from the Patterns and People That Hold You Back, which teaches you how to harness the power of perspective to re-envision and reinvent your approach to work, life, to achieve more, stress less, and overcome the barriers that stand in your way. Welcome to LIFEOLOGY.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
I am as well. That was a mouthful for me to say. That doesn't even include all the things you've done. So I cannot wait to hear more about that. So is this your first book?
Yes, it is. First book just came out April 5th. So first month.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Really excited.
Well, I'm honored to have you on my show today. Before we get started, I want to find out, how did you even become this executive coach? How did you know that you were interested in tech? Tell me everything.
Well, where do I begin? So I spent a lot of my career as a program and operations manager, diving in with teams on, how to get things done effectively. And what I noticed in a very early in my career and kept coming up was the things getting people's way from getting their work done. It was never skills or expertise. Mm-hmm. It was interpersonal and team dynamics issues that were being unaddressed. And at first in my career, people would say to me, oh, just focus on the work and the people stuff later. But I knew that wasn't right. Like that made no sense at all. Yeah. And as I kept reinforcing, no, if we figure out how this team can be more inclusive and people can communicate better and feel like they're connected to the mission, then the work gets done faster at higher quality and it all works out. And this early hypothesis that was then, validated through extensive research on psychological safety and organizational culture, it kept being my thesis for how to run teams effectively. And through that, I got really interested in mentoring and running team workshops and doing group facilitation and becoming a coach, a certified executive coach, to get a little bit more of a framework behind what I was doing.
Yeah. It's always interesting when people say things like that. We'll just focus on the work. Well, you think about when you grew up as a kid, that was like a work environment. So every family has its own culture. Everyone has, their own table manners. People have how they clean the room. All that is a specific culture. And so for example, if I were to use that technique of this saying, just focus on the work, if I only focus on my chores, but I don't interact with my family, well, that's going to be a pretty uncomfortable family dynamic. And so when you think about that respect, I'd probably get punished too for it. But when you think about it in that respect, it doesn't make sense to just focus on something and not the interpersonal connectedness, because a team is only as effective as the interpersonal connections that they have, because if people, it allows for brainstorming, it allows for so many different aspects of the whole company to level up. So you don't need me to say this, but obviously it just seems obvious that you would focus on the cultural aspects of the team in order to be more successful.
Absolutely. And I felt the same. It was like, wait a second, why is this hard to, why is this point hard to land? And I think, it was in my early career in tech as a non-engineer, it took a while to figure out, hey, this was my sort of unique special sauce that I brought to the equation. And I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome around not being an engineer, being a non-engineer, a woman in tech, kind of underrepresented on many dimensions.
Many levels, of course.
And finally, when I was able to put, concrete examples around, hey, when we talk about, how each person fits into the bigger picture, they feel excited to share progress on their work as opposed to waiting till it's perfect. Things like that really started to help me communicate why the way that I approached work made sense and added value and was just as important as bringing technical expertise.
It's always interesting because things like that happen where when allows for those types of concepts, then it allows for vulnerability. Vulnerability is incredibly important because that allows for collaboration, allows for teamwork. And because if people are like, oh, I have to have this at 100% all the time or show my best work, that's a lot of pressure. I remember when I was in school, I had to do these things. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. But to have this aspect of showing that, I'm a little vulnerable, I need some help. It's not, the best picture, but this is what I have, what I've created thus far. And then that people can really join in and help polish it as well, which is pretty cool.
Exactly. And it creates trust. Like you said, the vulnerability breeds trust and a sense of, hey, like you said, I don't have to be perfect. I can be figuring it out. It allows people to be able to support each other, to lend their expertise. And in the end, you have such a better outcome, whether it's, working in sales or tech or whatever, you have, brought in multiple perspectives to get something done.
One of the many things you've said, but just it made me think of this as well as, you said you're an underrepresented person in engineering, you're a non-engineered person, you're a woman in tech. A lot of people who have this perception of STEM as far as the science, technology, what is it? Tech, engineering, math, all of that, those types of majors in school, it's usually, and I hate to say it, but there's a lot of men that are involved in that. So one of the great things I like about you is you create this representation of people, more diverse people or underrepresented people in the tech world. And so I think that's why your voice is so great at this time in life, is because you're able to say, yeah, I may not be all this, but this is what I am. And so it really empowers those people who don't necessarily have a voice. And so get rid of their own, how to reframe their situation. If I may not be at the quote same level in certain things, but that's just what the world perceives, but doesn't mean that my value is diminished at all. So congratulations for being that voice.
And it took me a long time to kind of find that confidence.
I'm sure.
but I think it's been helpful, like you say, for me to share with others, hey, if you have a educational background, or you have a background in consulting, or you have a background in sales, or you have a background in this, and you're interested in getting involved in tech, there's many avenues to doing that, many kinds of roles. And the more tech kind of starts to being a part of every kind of industry, it becomes more clear of what that path is about.
Yes. Even though your book is specifically written for people to help reframe their situation in the workplace, I'm assuming it can also be applicable for people that are outside of the workplace as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
What would be some of the things? No, go ahead.
No, go for it.
No, I was going to say, what would be some of the things that, listening right now, before we jump into the book, what are some things just to prep people to say, okay, let me, first off, to reframe a situation, what does that even mean? So walk us through what those concepts mean, and then we'll jump specifically into the book and the different techniques.
Yeah. So reframing is about looking at a situation where you feel stuck. So it does not have to be work. Any situation will work for this. And thinking about the different perspectives that might be available that can produce different outcomes. And you might say, well, if I knew what those other perspectives were, I would already look at it that way. And so it's really about identifying when you're stuck, what are some of the patterns or behaviors that you're doing that are resulting in an outcome you're not happy with, or isn't getting you to where you want to be. And then saying, okay, I'm going to try a wildly different approach. I'm going to do this the opposite way, or try something maybe I wouldn't have thought would work before, or ask for help, or and really kind of shaking up the thing you're already doing to see what is possible when you try another route.
That is, it's funny, when I was in school and I learned about reframing, the analogy I always use is you literally take a picture and you just change the frame out. If you have, you've seen some really ornate frames before, and then you change it to maybe like a more modern one, like, oh, that's totally different. That looks really different. Yeah. It just creates a different perspective of it. So another way to kind of think about what you're saying is, we all know what a diamond looks like. So a diamond has so many different facets. So when you look at the situation and you take that diamond, just slightly turn it, and you look at a different facet. So the situation's very similar, but your response might be a little different. And if it's a little bit different, then what else could I do that's different? So in psychology, we teach that whatever you think about determines what you feel. What you feel determines how your body responds. So that thinking part, that's where we have to reframe something. So that's when, so if I'm looking at you right now, I'm like, I don't know if I like her, which I do, of course. But then all of a sudden, well, what is it I don't like? And is that true? And if it's not true, then what is true that I know about her so far? And so that kind of turns the wheels to say, okay, well, I'm perceiving something which may not be true. And the last thing I'll say this before I want to hear about you, but most people don't know this, and this is my nerdy self coming out. When people say I believe something, the opposite of the word belief in the English dictionary is truth, which is a mind blower to me. When someone on my show told me that, and I was like, wow. So if I believe something to be true, it's actually not true because I don't have 100% of the information. So that's why our beliefs are usually faulty, because they're not 100%. We don't have the full picture of something. So I know people are probably looking in the dictionary right now. But that's one of my favorite things to teach.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and you touched on such an important piece, which is is tapping into the questions we're asking ourselves and asking ourselves open-ended what questions, like what else might be here? What's another way to look at this? As opposed to getting into, well, why do I think this? Why did this happen to me? Why, in this analysis mode? And so you teed up this kind of tool for reframing, which is asking ourselves different kinds of questions that get us away from just confirmation around what we already think. It's like,
exactly,
why don't I like this person because to, well, what else is here? We have to think something differently when we ask ourselves that.
What would you say is the number one reason why most teams struggle when it comes to just, I won't say collaboration, but just interaction in general, interpersonal ineffectiveness?
I think it's a lot of folks operating around assumptions based on, okay, this person didn't respond to me, so it might mean X, Y, Z things. One, they're trying to sabotage me. They don't care. They don't like me. And we usually go really negative with it. Yes. And with working remotely and hybrid and distributed, when we don't see people every day, those assumptions can quickly turn negative also, because I think when we don't see people, we don't always give people the benefit of the doubt. And so that can create more tension as well. And so I'd say assumptions, because we haven't put in the work to actually get to know people or challenge our assumptions or give people the benefit of the doubt or give someone feedback if something didn't land well. Like all of those assumptions, I think, can really pile on to create a lot of miscommunications, misunderstood expectations, lack of clarity. And even if you're not able to meet with people in person, it's actually totally fine. You just have to make the effort to have those conversations. Yes.
I agree with you when it comes to filling in the blank with what we don't know. Yeah. It doesn't matter what I do. I can be pretty creative with some things I come up with. So if I've had a rough day and all of a sudden, I think of something and I haven't maybe heard back from someone, I'll be honest, I can come up with some pretty doozies of why they didn't do it. And then I'm already preparing myself to be upset to go off on them. And then they're like, hey, sorry, James, my phone was off. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, then I wasted all that time.
You don't hate me, wait.
I know. And then I wasted all that time, filling in the blank with my own thoughts when all I simply had to do was either ask or to say, well, maybe historically I know this person, that's never happened before. So I don't have to go that dark with what I'm thinking. Just simply ask and I wait for it.
Yeah. So I love that example because that also applies to when we go negative and self-critical about ourselves. And I say to folks often, when we kind of spiral or snowball around, what if this and people think this or that, is that actually in line with other behavior? So you said this exact thing, like, if people think what if people think I'm lying because I didn't finish the status report in time? It's like, is that within this, like the characteristics you've displayed? Correct. Is there any real risk of people thinking that? And sometimes when you ask someone that, they say, no, there's no risk. Like, no, of course not. Right. And so I think we can ask ourselves the same questions, whether it's about someone else or our own judgments and snowballing. Like, is this a real risk I should be afraid of? Like, I'm not a tall person. Is it a risk? Someone's going to say, like, she's so tall and overbearing. It's like, no, that's not in the realm of reality. So I don't have to get in that like zone of like, what if this, what if this? And I think when we start filtering what to actually spend energy and, like you said, this cognitive load around, instead of just having everything on the table for spiraling, it starts to let us focus on what matters.
And it becomes so exhausting when we do spiral. I mean, once again, we all do it. We've all been there before, but I always like to tell people, think of every morning you're giving 100 energy dollars. So I get to choose how much am I going to spend on this conversation? How much am I going to spend on worrying about something? So when you can think about it in that respect, it really holds you accountable. There's nothing worse than feeling depleted at the end of the day, because essentially you've squandered those energy points and didn't have enough to allocate all the way through the day. And so at the end of the day, you're like, oh my God, nobody talked to me. And so it's so important to realize, if you use this type of concept, is as I'm talking to someone, I've given them 3 energy points. Is that enough? I want to be interactive and get what I need and have them, get what they need as well. But then if I continue to talk about something, so that's where like gossiping can come into play. That's where sparring with other people come into play. Once again, time and place for everything. And if you think it's healthy for you, that's on you. But it's also good to know that there are other things we don't have to spend our energy points on. And so sometimes when we spiral, when we get stuck in these cognitive dissonance or these thinking errors, it can be a really difficult thing. So just anyone listening right now and watching us right now, just be mindful of that. If you find that there's something's a lot of work in a conversation, probably is a lot of work. And so you're probably investing a little bit more than you need to. And so when you can pull yourself out of that, extract yourself in a very healthy, classy way, then all of a sudden move on to something else that maybe give you more return on your investment.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's interesting, the paying attention to both what's, kind of feeding us, sort of building up more points, what's giving us some extra credit, people that boost our energy versus take away, right? And sometimes I think we can sort of, if we think in advance, like, hey, this conversation is going to take a lot. What can I do first or after to really reset myself or get myself centered and grounded? Maybe I have to have a hard negotiation or conversation with a teammate or manager or someone in my life. What can I do so I don't enter that conversation depleted?
Yes.
Because then again, we might be reactive or make assumptions. And I think the more we can really sort of coach ourselves into those conversations and be aware of when something has the potential of being a little bit more, taxing of those points, then we can also handle it with a little bit more resilience.
Yes, I really like that. I really like the addition that you had in that theory. It's really sound. It's also important because I don't know if you've noticed this, Lia, but I've noticed, what I teach when it comes to core beliefs is when we're kids, we all experienced something. Either people told us something, or in a moment we were so embarrassed about something that we told ourselves something. And so we have this loop of things that happen all the time. So if we as adults, if I do something really silly, and if I were to say, James, you're so stupid, what's wrong with you? You always do this. Whatever that mantra is, whatever that word that's been, or the phrase that's been used over and over that you say, that is something, unfortunately, that you as a child, not you, but a listener, has experienced. And so they allow themselves to say that. So as adults, we don't realize that we keep saying the same thing over and over again. And so if we can stop and challenge that and say, wait a minute, I'm not stupid. I'm not fat. I'm not ugly. I'm not whatever it might be. All of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute, if I've been telling myself that for so long, just like this reframe, well, if that's not true, then what is true? And so that slight shift, what is true about me? And if I can't come up with it, I can say, well, what does Lia think about me? What does my mom think about me? What does my spouse think about me? What do my friends think about me? And that allows you to retrain yourself to say, this is who I am, not the person I thought I was when I was a kid, what I was told or what I told myself. Now, all of a sudden, this is how I can reframe my thinking, and I can show up who I authentically am. And when a person can do that, the world is our oyster. It's crazy. It's fantastic.
Exactly. And this is exactly what I talk about in the book, where we have these sort of like you said, program beliefs around concepts like feedback or negotiations or whatever it is, that they're bad, they're hard. It means I'm wrong. I'm not good enough. Like you said, I'm stupid. I can't handle this. And then when we enter a conversation, like take feedback, thinking, feedback is when someone tells me what they don't like about me. That's what I think feedback is. Like we walk into a meeting, it's not going to go well. Like there's no way that will go well if that's the belief we're bringing to it. And so when we can reframe these kind of challenges that we keep facing and running into at work or in life, as we talked about, we see, wait a second, this thing that I believed, like you say, subconsciously, unconsciously, whatever, isn't the only answer for me. And I can now break through these challenges and see they don't have the power over me that they used to.
I am back with Lia Garvin. We are talking to her about her book, Unstuck, Reframe Your Thinking to Free Yourself from the Patterns and People That Hold You Back. Lia was sharing all this information. So if you've not heard the first part of the show, definitely hit rewind and listen to the beginning of it. Lia, talk with me more about this. So this book itself, is it a workbook? Is it what kind of book is it?
Ooh, I love that question. I would say it's a little bit of a workbook toolkit kind of, I would say, I don't know, manifesto, if you will. It dives into these 12 different challenges that show up for women and really everybody within the workplace, from feedback to talking about our work to decision-making, negotiating, comparison, and it looks at why we get stuck. And it's really, the why is a lot around, some of the biases and double standards that women in the workplace feel. But I think a lot of us can feel stuck around for similar ways. then shares stories, anecdotes, tools that I've found or seen or seen others really benefit from to overcome them. And then at the end of each chapter actually has a little bit of a workbook where I share an exercise to try to really bring these tools to life. So,
so it's pretty comprehensive.
The right word.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. Can you give us an example of one of the chapters and one of the things that's in there? Of course, I want my viewers and listeners to purchase this book, but give us an example of one of the chapters and what would be one of the toolkits that you would give us or techniques to practice.
Yeah. So I'll take feedback and confidence. Those are two chapters I think have sort of exercises to think about in interesting ways, which are actually all of them have interesting exercises, but those are the ones that are most top of mind. So feedback is a real tough one in the workplace and with our personal lives. Like there's really, it's tough. Okay. No matter what it is. And I think a lot of that is like I mentioned, because we have the belief that feedback is bad. It's negative. It's criticism. And therefore it's really hard to give feedback because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings or we feel like they might be defensive. And then from the flip side, we're afraid to receive it because what is this person going to say? It could be anything. And so the reframe I share around feedback is reminding ourselves it is a data point. It is a piece of information that shares more about the feedback giver than it does about even you and your behavior.
I like
it
that. Ties
to their preferences and their beliefs. And I mean, for example, one manager could say, I love, keep speaking up in meetings. I love your ideas, keep going out there. Another one could say, I think, you're kind of taking too much airtime, right? There could be some problems in that kind of feedback otherwise. But like, I'm just saying everybody has different preferences. And if we anchor to every piece of feedback, we'll be really thrashed around and feel like, I don't even know.
I like that.
How to get through this.
I like that reframe. Obviously, that's the great way to look at it because you're right. Most people think feedback is a negative, but I really like that to say this is really more about the other person. I remember when I was in a university, I was always taught before I went to university. Yes, it's important to learn, but it's also important to learn the teacher because if you can learn what they want, what they need, I shouldn't tell this, but I used to be a university professor, then you're going to pass a class really easily. So when you can learn how to quote read the professor, then that's something you can do. But it's true. It's the same type of thing when it comes to these feedback, when it comes to your manager, et cetera. So good. I really like that. I will think about that myself.
Yeah. And so the tool that I share in the feedback chapter it's for actually feedback giving, because I think there's a lot about receiving it and working through your inner critic and things like that, which you've talked about, these core beliefs. But as a feedback giver, we can often, and it might show up at work, but definitely in our own personal relationships, hold back sharing an important message because we are afraid of, I don't know if it's going to come across this way, or I don't know how the person's respond. And if we actually use effective tools of feedback delivery, which is bringing in empathy, really demonstrating that, you care about this relationship, that you care how the other person feels, that you put yourself in that person's shoes. If we're specific, if we say something, actionable that they can understand, not, you're a bad person, but in this meeting, this behavior was problematic, right? Then we can rewrite our narrative around feedback. And so the exercise I share is to think of a piece of feedback that you need to deliver and then rewrite it using the tools and think, what was that filter about? And if you took off the filter, would it be something that you'd be more comfortable sharing?
I want to piggyback off that as well. I always tell people is you reverse engineer it. How do you want to feel after an event? Well, usually we want to feel pretty good. Like, I want to be vindicated and, for whatever. But the point is, how do you want to feel? So obviously we want to feel pretty good. So if I reverse engineer the situation, well, I'm not going to say you annoy me. This is whatever. So I'm probably going to reword things differently. So if you can think the outcome, reverse engineer it, just like you said, then you change the filters and labels and verbiage of how you deliver something, because in doing that, that will net you the response you want, or the outcome that you want to experience once it's done.
Exactly. And actually, I talk about that in my conflict chapter. So you teed up another tool of thinking through the outcome, right? And then that helps you figure out how to deal with, difficult coworkers or friends or whoever. sharing another example from the chapter about confidence, fear is often tied with confidence or a lack of confidence. And I think as I thought through a lot of the fears that I had, and we've already talked about snowballing thoughts, I thought about when we think about this kind of what's the worst that could happen situation. And unchecked, the worst that could happen is something like I present, the sales numbers in a meeting and I read out the wrong numbers. And after my manager comes and tells me, I'm not good at my job, a week later I get fired. Then a week later I lose my house, and then I get divorced, and then I'm a loser. And now I move back in with my parents' basement. You know what I mean? Like, and my reframe there is to remind ourselves, like, would we really let all of these things happen and not intervene at any point?
Well, that's a good point,
right?
Because you become helpless.
Right. We're not helpless. So, resetting, and this is also the exercise at the end of the chapter, is take a what's the worst that could happen thought, like I blow it in this presentation, and then say, and then what? And now introduce this corrective step, if you will. And you say, okay, I blow it in the presentation. And then after I talk to my manager about what I think went wrong, and then what? Then I fix my report and I ask to have another conversation where I talk through the updated presentation. And then what? Then I debrief with with my manager, and they say, hey, okay, I can see you're working on this. And then what? Next time I practice more. And then what? Next time it goes better, right? Didn't have to move back into the basement. I think it can build confidence because you remind yourself that you have a lot more agency and control in a situation that feels really scary, or like, if this all goes wrong, my life will be over. There's a lot of ways you can intervene along the way where you can course correct.
I really like that because, and we're gonna have to wrap up here in a second, but I really like that because you empower the person, because you're right. When we do that worst case scenario, we go through that whole diatribe of what could happen, the hypothetical. Yeah, you're right. There's no actionable items in there. It's this happens and there's nothing I can do about it. But you're absolutely right. Yeah. All individuals have that ability to have some form of resilience, and we will stand up for ourselves when we need to. So good for you. Obviously, you've done an incredible job with this book, is to be able to introduce that. Well, then what if, from an actionable standpoint of a place of confidence of, I wouldn't let that happen. So what will I do? So I really stand behind that. And I can't wait for my listeners and viewers to purchase this book. Unfortunately, our time is up. If they want to purchase this book, Lia Garvin, the book, one more time, Unstuck, Reframe Your Thinking to Free Yourself from the Patterns of People That Hold You Back, where will they find all this information online?
Yeah, go ahead to my website at www.liagarvin.com, and you can find information on the book, my coaching, consulting, anything else you want to find there.
Wonderful. My listeners also know that if they cannot find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmiller@lifeology.com, and I'll have all of Lia's information there. I'll have the book in the show notes as well, which you can purchase it. So Lia, once again, thank you so much for being a fantastic guest. I've truly enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Thank you. Me too.